what is structured content? How do we define it, and what is the benefit for global companies?
I would say that it's not really a hard and fast rule, but structured content is a strategy which involves establishing a simple set of well-defined rules that you're going to use to format your content or lay it out in a hierarchical structure, or organize it in a nice, clean way. And the focus is on the organizational structure of the content rather than the formatting and styling and presentation and how it's actually going to end up looking. And by creating this clean structure, it allows for a number of advantages. For example, you can publish the content to different channels without having to rework or do additional layout. The templating and publication, presentation of the content is automatic, based on having a nice clean structure to work from, which the templates can then understand. So typically that might be online or print. There are also benefits when it comes to localization, because if you have a nice, clean, well-defined structure, it lends itself to automated processing and analysis at every stage of the localization pipeline. So when you're scoping out what is new in the content, actually handing it off to translators for translation, and then integrating the changes and producing the result, all of that can be a lot more automated if the content is cleanly structured.
What's the conventional or what's the traditional way of structuring content, and how is it different? Like, what are we moving from?
So a sort of traditional approach might be a Word document, a PowerPoint presentation, a web page. So all these things are sort of loosely structured. It's free-form content, I would call it, where you have kind of the layout is already established and it's there in the format itself. What we're trying to do with structured content is separate what is the organizational structure of the content from how it's presented. So all the styling information is set aside, and you're really just sort of boiling it down to headings, paragraphs, subheadings, lists, simple kind of objects that are more machine readable.
And how many global companies are still doing it in the traditional way, and what's the shift that they have to do? Like, I guess the mindset shift they have to do to move it to a more structured approach.
I think there's going to be a real mixture out there. There's a lot of content that still is authored in quite a traditional way. A good example of that might be HTML emails. Those are typically going to be set out using kind of HTML templates, and there's not a lot of kind of automation behind that. It's sort of very ad hoc created content. Where you have very large bodies of content, for example, online help documentation, or web content that's in a content management system, increasingly now companies are moving to a more structured approach, and a lot of we see a trend towards headless content management systems, for example, and those would be a good example of structured content.
When you come into a company and they're still using a lot of conventional content, what are the first things you're looking for to make that move for them?
I think it's having enough of a volume to really make the investment worthwhile, because probably the one feature of structured content is that there's more of an investment upfront in establishing your model and your organizational structure, and creating the content is even perhaps a little bit more difficult, because as an author you're kind of working a little bit blind. You don't see the layout and the presentation as you're creating the content. You're actually having to think in terms of the organizational structure of the content only, and you're kind of doing it in a little bit blind. So there's more of an effort that goes in at the start, I think, but where you get the benefit is the long-term maintenance, especially if it's a very large body of content that's changing over a period of time.
Mm-hmm. One thing I noticed as well in working with like the headless system is it requires interaction between members of the team more than maybe as an author I'm more used to, because when you have everything laid out, you just know, as you say, you know where everything is. But when you're having to think, okay, well, how is this being structured? How do I change this? You then have to talk to developers. Is that something that you find you need to do more? You have to sort of bridge gaps between members of the team that maybe weren't there or very strong before?
Yeah, I think that's fair. It ends up being a collaborative effort between technical people and authors and content creators and designers to really get a good result. You do need everybody working together, and actually, there's at the planning stage.